The unforeseen encounter, the echoing footsteps down the polished corridors of Nexus Innovations, were Arthur Vance's alone, each stride a stark reminder of the crumbling empire he carried on his shoulders. His reflection, multiplied in the glass walls, showed a man still impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit, a relic from more prosperous times, but with deep, shadowed eyes that no manufactured confidence could conceal. "Last chance," he muttered to himself, adjusting the deep burgundy tie his mother had given him for his 40th birthday, back when his real estate empire seemed unshakable. The automatic doors glided open with a discreet sigh, as if the boardroom itself was holding its breath. And then, time froze. Seated at the head of the black marble table, surrounded by attentive executives, was Laura Jenkins. Not the Laura he held in the dusty memories of 7 years ago, the young administrative assistant with dreaming eyes and ambitions too big for her own good. This Laura exuded power, sitting ramrod straight in a pristine white blazer, her dark hair cut in a sharp bob that framed cheekbones sculpted by years and sheer determination. Her gaze met his, and it was as if an electric current shot through the entire room. "Welcome, Mr. Vance." Her voice was controlled, professional, but carried an indefinable note that made his throat tighten. It seems times have changed for both of us. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The tycoon who once commanded a billion-dollar real estate empire was now practically begging for a partnership with the company chaired by the very woman he had publicly humiliated. "Ms. Jenkins," he managed to say, making a monumental effort to maintain his composure. "Thank you for the opportunity to present my proposal. Please, have a seat." She gestured to the only empty chair, directly opposite hers. "We're curious to hear about this urban revitalization project." The next 2 hours were an uncomfortable dance. Arthur presented, with growing passion, the details of his latest venture, a revolutionary project for sustainable urban revitalization that could transform a dilapidated historic district into a model of community development. With each slide, each financial projection, each architectural detail, he felt Laura's penetrating gaze evaluating not just the project, but the man he had become. The executives asked incisive questions, some clearly designed to destabilize him. Arthur responded with the experience of someone who had navigated turbulent waters before, even if his ship was now barely afloat. "And what about current financing?" asked one of the directors, a man with thin glasses who made no secret of his skepticism. Arthur hesitated for a fraction of a second. "The initial investors remain committed, but to realize the project in its full vision, we need a partner who understands not only the financial aspect, but also the social and innovative value of the proposal." "The initial investors?" Laura interrupted, her tone revealing she knew the exact precariousness of his situation. "From what I understand, Meridian Bank withdrew its support 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was deafening. How did she know that? The information hadn't been released. Arthur felt cold sweat trickle down his back. "Negotiations are ongoing." He tried to recover, but he knew he'd been exposed. "Let's be honest, Mr. Vance." Laura closed the folder in front of her with a precise movement. "Your company is on the verge of bankruptcy. This project is your last gamble, and ironically, you've come to us to save it." The words hung in the air like sharp blades. Arthur tasted the bitter flavor of humiliation, the same taste he imagined Laura felt that night, 7 years ago, when he publicly rejected her at a gala dinner, declaring for all to hear that ambition and dreams don't pay bills, words that now returned to haunt him. "Yes," he finally admitted, honesty his only remaining card. "I'm here because I need this project, but also because it's a good project, perhaps the best I've ever conceived." Something subtly shifted in Laura's gaze, a small crack in her professional armor. "Gentlemen, ladies," she addressed the table, I'd like to discuss a few points with Mr. Vance in private. We can reconvene in 30 minutes. The room emptied quickly, leaving them alone in a silence heavy with unspoken history. Through the panoramic windows, the city stretched out like a carpet of possibilities. The same city where he once reigned supreme, and where she now commanded her own empire. "Why should I help you, Arthur?" she asked, using his first name for the first time, her voice softer, but no less powerful. "Because the project is good," he replied simply. "And because you've always been smarter than me. You recognize value when you see it." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "You're right about one thing. The project is exceptional. Exactly the kind of innovation Nexus Innovations needs to consolidate our position in the international market." She stood up, walking slowly to the window, her silhouette outlined against the city skyline, a living metaphor for how much things had changed. "You know what's ironic, Arthur? This project incorporates ideas very similar to those I tried to present to you years ago. The ones you dismissed as naive dreams from a girl who didn't understand how the real world works." The weight of memory fell upon him like an avalanche. He remembered that day. Laura, vibrant with enthusiasm, showing him sketches of an integrated urban development concept that he had dismissed without even properly looking at. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words almost painful to utter, "about many things." Laura stared at him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his eyes. "Our board will see value in this project," she finally said. "We'll need a strict timeline, exactly 1 year, with quarterly deliverables and regular accountability." The relief that flooded Arthur was so intense that for a moment he feared his legs would give out. "Thank you. You won't regret it." "I'm not doing this for you," she clarified, her tone returning to its previous professionalism. "I'm doing it because I believe in the project, and because Nexus Innovations needs this innovation as much as you need us." When the directors returned, they found an agreement already outlined. Laura announced that Nexus Innovations would accept the partnership, setting rigorous conditions and an inflexible timeline. The message was clear. A single mistake, a single failure, and everything would be lost. At the end of the meeting, as the executives dispersed, discussing the next steps, Arthur approached Laura one last time. "Can I ask you something personal?" he questioned, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "How did you get here? In just 7 years?" An enigmatic smile touched her lips. "The same way you fell, Arthur, one day at a time," as he walked back to his office. Now, just a shadow of the corporate empire he once commanded, Arthur reflected on the winding paths life takes. How could he have imagined, that night at the gala dinner, when he humiliated the woman he secretly loved for fear that she wouldn't fit into his elite world, that one day it would be he who no longer fit into that world? His secretary greeted him with a worried expression. "Mr. Vance, the bank called again about the office mortgage." "Tell them we'll have news soon," he replied with renewed confidence. "Nexus Innovations has accepted the partnership." The surprise on the woman's face was genuine. Laura Jenkins' company? But how? "Sometimes, Margaret," he said, walking into his office and closing the door. "Life gives us a second chance." Sitting in his worn leather chair, Arthur opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside lay a yellowed newspaper clipping, a photo of Laura receiving a Business Innovation Award 3 years ago. He had followed her rise from afar, silently collecting news about her successes, like someone preserving relics of a past that could have been different. Beside the clipping was a small turtle-shaped brooch, identical to one he had given her when they first met, symbolizing perseverance. He wondered if she still had the original, or if she had discarded that memory along with all the others of him. In the apartment he now rented, having sold his luxurious penthouse to pay debts, Arthur found his mother waiting with dinner ready. "How was the meeting, son?" Mrs. Evelyn asked, her eyes revealing the concern she tried to hide. "It was surprising," he replied, kissing her forehead. "We got the partnership." "Thank goodness," she sighed with relief. "So we can rest easier about the hospital bills." Arthur nodded, hiding his own uncertainty. His mother's heart treatments consumed much of his remaining resources, and he lived with the constant fear of not being able to provide her with the necessary care. "Everything will be all right now, Mom, I promise." What he didn't know, as he shared a simple meal with the woman who had given him everything, was that the most recent and specialized treatments his mother had been receiving didn't come only from the small pension he could barely maintain. For 3 years, an anonymous benefactor had ensured Mrs. Evelyn received the best medical care available. A benefactor with determined eyes and a turtle brooch kept in the drawer of her presidential desk. "Do you think Arthur truly understands the depth of his past mistakes? And what about Laura? Is she driven by forgiveness or something else?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden Truths that same night. In an elegant penthouse in the city's financial center, Laura Jenkins looked out at the illuminated city, a glass of red wine in her hands, the echo of the meeting still reverberating in her mind. "Mummy?" A sleepy voice called from behind her. "Are you going to say goodnight to me now?" Laura turned, and all professional hardness melted away at the sight of her 6-year-old daughter standing at the bedroom door, clutching a plush rabbit. "Of course, my love," she smiled, setting the glass aside. "Just thinking." "About work again?" the girl asked, with the surprising intuition children sometimes show. "Yes," Laura admitted, picking up her daughter. "But now it's time for stories and sweet dreams." As she led her daughter back to bed, Laura couldn't help but notice how the girl's eyes, a peculiar shade of gray-green, reflected the hallway light exactly like her father's. The same eyes that today had stared at her with a mix of surprise, regret, and silent pleading. Eyes that Arthur Vance, in his arrogant ignorance, still didn't know he had passed on to the next generation. "Tell me the story of the turtle who became a princess," the girl asked, snuggling under the covers. Laura smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. It was her daughter's favorite story, a fable she had created about a determined little turtle who, against all odds, transformed into a powerful princess through hard work and kindness. An innocent metaphor for her own journey, a story that one day, when her daughter was older, would gain more complex layers and additional characters, including the arrogant prince who discovered too late that he had rejected his true treasure. "Once upon a time," she began, as she always did, "there was a little turtle whom everyone underestimated." Meanwhile, across the city, Arthur stared at the ceiling of his rented room, thinking about second chances and the strange path destiny had taken to bring him back to the starting point. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. A year of collaboration with the woman he had deeply hurt. A year to save his last venture. A year to, perhaps, redeem himself. A year to discover all the secrets that separated them, including a little girl with gray-green eyes who loved stories about brave turtles. The first week of their joint work began with the palpable tension of 2 opposing forces, compelled to orbit in the same space. Arthur had been assigned a room on the 20th floor of Nexus Innovations, not on the 25th, where Laura's office was, but close enough to signal the project's importance. The space was impersonal, functional, with a view of the city's east side, where one could coincidentally glimpse the outlines of the district they intended to revitalize. The team assigned to work with him was young, talented, and clearly loyal to Laura. Everyone seemed to study him with the curiosity of someone observing an endangered species, the once powerful Arthur Vance, now dependent on the professional generosity of his former companion. "Good morning, everyone," he began at the first alignment meeting, determined not to let his current position affect his authority on a subject he had mastered for decades. I appreciate the opportunity to work together on this project, which I believe will be transformative, not only for the Lantern District, but for the entire concept of sustainable urban revitalization. A young architect with curly hair raised her hand. Mr. Vance, I confess I studied your previous projects in college. The Grand Arbor Complex was considered revolutionary in terms of environmental integration. What has changed in your vision since then? The question, though innocent, hit a raw nerve. The Grand Arbor Complex had been one of his great successes before his former partner, Edward Foster, secretly sold the rights to a foreign conglomerate, initiating his downfall. "I've matured," he replied with surprising sincerity, even to himself. "I've realized that creating spaces that impress architects isn't enough. We need to create places where communities can truly flourish." The young professionals exchanged surprised glances. It wasn't the arrogant response they expected from the man whose ruthless reputation preceded any meeting. The door opened, and Laura entered, bringing with her that aura of quiet authority that now characterized her. "I see you've already started. Excellent." Her tone was professional, but not hostile. "I'd like to introduce the chief consultant who will oversee our project alongside Mr. Vance." A middle-aged man entered right behind her, and Arthur felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "I believe you already know each other," Laura continued, seemingly oblivious to Arthur's shock. "Robert Kingston will be our link between the operational teams." Robert, his college friend, the best man at his failed wedding, and one of the few who had remained by his side after his fall, smiled awkwardly. "Hello, Arthur." The next 2 hours were an exercise in restraint. Arthur led the meeting with his usual competence, while his mind worked at 1,000 miles an hour. Robert? His Robert? Worked for Laura? Since when? And why had he never mentioned it during the occasional lunches they still shared? After the meeting, when everyone had left, Robert stayed behind. "I know what you're thinking," he began, closing the door. "I highly doubt it," Arthur replied, his voice low, controlled. "How long, Robert?" 5 years, his friend admitted, sitting down heavily. "I started as an external consultant shortly after Laura founded Nexus Innovations. I became a permanent advisor 3 years ago." 3 years, Arthur repeated, the significance of that number not lost on him. "Exactly when Edward betrayed me, and everything started to fall apart." Robert sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "It's not what you're thinking, Arthur. I never what? Never told her about my weaknesses? Never revealed where the cracks in my empire were? Never betrayed your trust," Robert finished firmly. "And I also never lied to Laura about our friendship. She always knew we remained close." Arthur stared at his friend, searching for signs of deceit that, to his frustration, he couldn't find. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Would you have accepted it?" Robert asked, leaning forward. "In the beginning, when the wound of the breakup was still fresh, and later, when your pride was so hurt by the fall, would you have accepted knowing I worked for her?" Arthur looked away, knowing the answer was no. His pride, the same pride that had led him to publicly reject Laura years ago, would have seen Robert's collaboration as another betrayal. "Does she know about us?" Arthur asked, suddenly insecure. Robert frowned. "Us? About what happened that night at the gala dinner?" "Ah." Understanding lit up his friend's face. "Yes, she told me her version. I never asked for yours. I thought there were things friends shouldn't discuss." An uncomfortable silence hung between them, loaded with decades of shared history. "She's not seeking revenge, if that's what worries you," Robert finally said. "She accepted this project because it's exactly what the company needs right now. International expansion isn't going as well as the papers make it seem." The revelation surprised Arthur. On the surface, Nexus Innovations seemed unshakable. The darling of the urban development sector, with projects on 3 continents. Financial problems? Nothing catastrophic, but enough to cause sleepless nights, Robert replied, allowing himself an honesty Laura would probably not approve of. This project could be the turning point both of you need. The idea that Laura also needed him, even if only professionally, provoked a strange mix of relief and concern in Arthur. For years, he had imagined her untouchable, invulnerable, building her empire on the ruins of the heart he had broken. "Thanks for the honesty," Arthur finally said, extending his hand. "I hope we can work well together, despite everything." Robert shook his hand with the firmness of decades of friendship. "She's changed, Arthur, and so have you, even if you don't realize it yet. What do you think is the biggest secret Laura is keeping from Arthur? Do you believe Arthur deserves a second chance, especially after his past actions? Share your opinions in the comments. Your feedback is invaluable. Please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. A father's discovery 2 weeks later, the first official visit to the Lantern District was scheduled. The location, just 20 minutes from the financial center, was a historic enclave with centuries-old mansions, tree-lined squares, and a cohesive community that bravely resisted the gentrification devouring neighboring areas. Laura insisted on leading the visit personally, something unusual for someone in her position. As they walked through the cobblestone streets, Arthur noticed how the residents greeted her, not with the deference reserved for powerful executives, but with the warm familiarity reserved for prodigal children. "Ms. Jenkins," an elderly woman called from a small grocery store, "come have some coffee. I brought those cinnamon buns your daughter loves." Laura smiled, a genuine smile that Arthur rarely saw in the corporate environment. "Thank you, Mrs. Davies. I'll stop by later with Amelia." The mention of her daughter's name caused a small jolt in Arthur. Amelia. Now the mysterious child had a name. "You've kept in touch with the neighborhood all these years," he observed, as they continued down the main street. "I never really left," she replied simply. "When I founded Nexus Innovations, my first small office was 2 blocks from here. But you don't live here anymore," he commented, remembering the penthouse mentioned by the staff. "Life changes, our needs do too," she said enigmatically. "But my family remains here. Their restaurant is at the end of this street." As if summoned by her words, a renovated establishment appeared on the corner. "Flavors of Memory," announced the elegant sign above a beautifully restored old house. Through the large windows, one could see the cozy interior, completely packed with a waiting line on the sidewalk. "It started as a small guest house my parents ran," Laura explained, a touch of pride evident in her voice. "Now it's one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city." "You helped with the expansion," Arthur guessed, not as a question. Laura nodded, her gaze momentarily lost in memories. "It was the first investment I made when I started to prosper. Some thought it was crazy to use precious initial capital on a family restaurant instead of reinvesting in the nascent company. But it wasn't just a financial investment," he observed, understanding something fundamental about her that he had never truly seen before. "No," she agreed, looking at him with surprise at his perception. "It was an investment in roots, in purpose." They continued walking, with the technical team following a few steps behind, giving them a space that seemed increasingly necessary for conversations that transcended the professional. The main project site, an old abandoned industrial complex that occupied almost an entire block, loomed before them like a sleeping giant of bricks and rusted metal. "As a child, I used to look at this place from my bedroom window," Laura commented, her voice softening with the memory. "I imagined what it would be like to transform it into something beautiful, useful for the community. And now you can," Arthur replied, feeling the weight of that childhood dream being realized. "We can," she corrected him professionally again, "if we stick to the schedule." As the technical visit progressed, Arthur watched Laura interact with the residents, listening to their concerns, explaining how the project would benefit the community without displacing them through inflated rents, a common problem in urban revitalization. "How do you plan to guarantee that?" he asked during a moment alone, genuinely intrigued by her proposed approach. "Property value appreciation is inevitable after revitalization, unless the community itself owns a significant portion of the properties," she replied, handing him a folder that wasn't in the official presentation. A community fund managed by the residents themselves, with profit sharing from the commercial venture. Arthur flipped through the document, amazed at the ingenuity of the solution. It was exactly the kind of approach he would never have considered in his glory days, when maximizing returns for investors was the only guide. "This is revolutionary," he admitted, genuinely impressed. "It's just fair," she corrected. "And curiously, it's also profitable in the long run. Stable communities generate sustainable value." At the end of the day, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues, the team returned to their cars, leaving Laura and Arthur momentarily alone, near the old gate of the industrial complex. "Do you really believe we can transform this place in 1 year?" he asked, looking at the immensity of the challenge ahead. "If we work together, yes," she replied, and for the first time that day, a trace of vulnerability emerged in her voice. "This project means a lot to me, Arthur. It's not just business." "I realized that today," he said softly. "Thank you for showing me." A moment of comfortable silence settled between them, the first since their reunion, before being broken by Laura's cell phone ringing. "Mom?" "Yes, I'm finishing up here. I'll be home for dinner." She spoke on the phone, her tone completely transforming as she spoke to her daughter. "Yes, sweetie. We can read 2 stories tonight, I promise." Upon hanging up, she met Arthur's questioning gaze. "Amelia," she explained simply. 6 years old, curious about everything, and loves stories. 6 years old. The math was simple and disturbing, but Arthur didn't dare ask the question burning in his mind. "She must be special," he commented instead. "She's everything to me," Laura replied with disarming sincerity. Then, as if she had revealed too much, she composed herself. "The driver can take you back to the office or home, if you prefer." "Thank you, but I think I'll stay a bit longer," he replied, feeling an inexplicable need to absorb more of this place that meant so much to her. "I want to think about some adaptations for the project, considering what I saw today." She nodded, an indecipherable expression crossing her face. "Good night, then." "Laura," he called as she walked away. "Your family's restaurant. Do they still serve that pumpkin soup you used to mention?" The surprise on her face was evident, surprise that he remembered something so small, so personal, from so many years ago. "Every Thursday," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips before she turned to leave. As he watched her get into the executive car, Arthur felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not just for the salvation of his last venture, but for something more fundamental that he had lost along the way. A connection to purpose beyond profit, to people beyond investors, to a worldview beyond financial spreadsheets. Walking slowly through the neighborhood, they would soon transform together. He stopped in front of Laura's family restaurant, observing through the windows the welcoming atmosphere, the families gathered, the food served with care. In a corner, he noticed a framed photograph, a younger Laura, her parents, and a small child smiling with eyes that, even from a distance, seemed strangely familiar. Thursday, he thought. Perhaps it was time to rediscover the taste of pumpkin soup, and with it, fragments of the person he could have been. Do you think Laura's daughter, Amelia, is also Arthur's? How do you think Arthur will react if he discovers the truth? Share your theories in the comments. Don't miss out on the next chapter of this incredible story. Hit that notification bell and subscribe now. The truth unfolds. The first quarter of the project progressed with the intensity of a marathon. Arthur rediscovered the frantic pace of work that had characterized his most productive years, but this time with a fundamental difference. It wasn't just ambition that drove him, but an almost visceral need to prove his worth, not to the market or to investors, but to himself and, though he would never admit it aloud, to Laura. Nights extended into spreadsheet analyses, architectural design reviews, and community impact studies. The young team, who had initially observed him with skepticism, began to show cautious respect. The Arthur Vance, who worked tirelessly alongside them, often being the last to leave the office, bore little resemblance to the arrogant figure described in corporate legends. On the third Thursday after the neighborhood visit, Arthur finally mustered the courage to enter Laura's family restaurant. Flavors of Memory was, as always, packed. The hostess greeted him with a polite smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "No, I was just hoping to try the pumpkin soup they serve today," he explained, feeling strangely nervous. The middle-aged woman behind the reception counter studied him for a moment, something in her gaze subtly shifting. "Are you Arthur Vance?" It wasn't a question, and the tone didn't carry the admiration or respect his name usually provoked in his glory years. There was something more complex there, recognition, perhaps a hint of resentment. "Yes," he admitted, bracing himself to be politely dismissed. To his surprise, the woman nodded. "We have a table available in the inner garden. This way, please. The garden was a charming space, with flowering vines climbing wooden pergolas and small lanterns creating a cozy atmosphere. Only 2 other tables were occupied in this space that seemed reserved for special occasions. As he studied the menu, Arthur felt a presence beside him. He looked up to find an older man, gray-haired, with a gentle yet assessing expression. "Mr. Vance, I'm Charles Jenkins," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "Laura's father." Arthur quickly stood up, shaking the offered hand. "Mr. Jenkins, it's a pleasure. Your restaurant is extraordinary." "Thank you. Built with a lot of hard work and a few tears," Charles replied, sitting down in the chair opposite without asking permission. "I hear you're working with my daughter on the industrial complex project." The conversation that followed was surprisingly cordial, considering everything. Charles didn't mention the past, nor did he allude to Arthur's previous relationship with his daughter. Instead, they talked about the neighborhood, about the community's needs, about the vision for the project. "Laura always believed this neighborhood could be a model of community development," Charles commented, as Arthur savored the best pumpkin soup he had ever tasted. "Even as a child, she drew plans for that abandoned complex. She told me," Arthur replied. "It's inspiring to see how she transformed those dreams into reality." Charles studied him for a moment. "You seem different from the man I briefly met years ago." Arthur put down his spoon, facing the other man. "I hope I am different, sir. Some lessons come at a very high cost." Something in Charles's gaze softened. "My wife says no one is just one version of themselves. We are many people throughout life." "Your wife seems wise." "Eleanor is the soul of this place," Charles confirmed, pointing to an elegant woman circulating among the tables in the main hall, greeting customers like old friends. "And the strength that kept our family together in difficult times." Before Arthur could respond, a small commotion caught his attention. A dark-haired girl in a floral dress ran between the tables, followed by a young woman who appeared to be her nanny. "Amelia, don't run in the restaurant," the young woman called. But the child had already spotted Charles and launched herself into his arms. "Grandpa, you promised you'd show me how to make pudding today." Charles caught his granddaughter in a warm hug, laughing. "And I will, little one. But first, I want to introduce someone." It was at this moment that Arthur saw her clearly for the first time. The shock was so profound that he feared his heart would simply stop. The dark hair like Laura's, but the eyes, those gray-green eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, the shape of her chin, the way she frowned when she looked at him with childlike curiosity. Everything screamed the truth he already suspected. "This is Mr. Vance," Charles introduced casually. "He's working with your mummy on the big project." "The old building that's going to be a park and houses?" the girl asked, surprising Arthur with her articulation. "Exactly that one," he managed to reply, his voice hoarser than he intended. Amelia studied him with the disconcerting frankness of children. "You look sad. Do you want one of the chocolates Grandpa keeps in the kitchen? They always make me happy." The lump that formed in Arthur's throat was almost suffocating. "Thank you for the kind offer, but I'm fine. Just surprised by how special this place is." Charles watched the interaction with an indecipherable expression. "Amelia, why don't you go with Julia to check if those chocolates are still there?" When the girl walked away, a heavy silence fell between the two men. "She has your eyes," Charles finally said, bluntly, "and your temperament, from what Laura tells me." Arthur felt the world spin. She never said, "Nor will she, unless it's absolutely necessary," Charles completed, his voice now harder. "My daughter will protect Amelia from any pain with her own life." "I would never hurt a child," Arthur protested, genuinely wounded by the insinuation. "Not intentionally, perhaps, but you hurt her mother so deeply that she left this neighborhood, the place she loved most, to protect her dignity. Imagine what would have happened if she had known about the pregnancy before you broke up." The implication was clear and devastating. Arthur visualized the scenario. Laura, vulnerable, revealing the pregnancy. He, at the height of his arrogance, questioning the paternity, or, worse, suggesting a discreet agreement to avoid scandals. "I would have been monstrous," he admitted, the realization too painful to deny. Charles nodded, not with anger, but with the sad acceptance of a shared truth. "When she found out, weeks after that dinner, you had already made it very clear what you thought of her and her impractical dreams." Arthur ran a hand over his face, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. "All these years, I have a daughter. Amelia has a mother who would move mountains for her," Charles gently corrected. "What she needs or doesn't need beyond that is not for me." At that moment, Eleanor Jenkins approached the table, her curious eyes alternating between her husband and the visitor. Charles stood up, kissing her face. "My dear, Mr. Vance was just leaving. He came to try our pumpkin soup." Eleanor studied Arthur with a discerning gaze only mothers possess. "I hope you enjoyed it. It's Laura's favorite recipe since childhood." "It was revealing," he replied honestly, Sarah standing up. "I appreciate the hospitality." As he walked to the exit, Arthur glimpsed Amelia in the kitchen, perched on a stool, watching intently as a chef demonstrated how to pour caramel into pudding molds. His daughter who didn't know him, who had grown up without him, who called another man daddy in her school stories. The pain that pierced him was different from anything he had ever felt, deeper than financial betrayal, sharper than bankruptcy, more devastating than public humiliation. It was the pain of an emptiness he never knew existed until that moment. How would you confront Laura if you were Arthur, now knowing about Amelia? Do you think Laura was right to keep Amelia's existence a secret? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video. And hit that subscribe button to stay updated on this emotional journey. Redemption and a new purpose. The following week, the first major quarterly presentation of the project was scheduled. Investors, municipal authorities, and community representatives would gather to evaluate the progress and next steps. The pressure was immense, but Arthur could barely concentrate. How could he face her now, knowing what he knew? How could he work alongside her, discuss blueprints and timelines, when the only question burning in his mind was about the girl with eyes just like his. The night before the presentation, when everyone had left the office, Robert found Arthur still working, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "You look terrible," his friend commented, placing a cup of strong coffee on the table. "Thanks for the honesty," Arthur replied, without looking up from the documents. "Is the presentation worrying you, or something else?" Arthur finally looked up. "Did you know about Amelia?" Robert showed no surprise at the question. "Yes, from the beginning. And you never thought I should know?" "It wasn't my story to tell," Robert replied simply. "And honestly, Arthur, you weren't in a position to be a father when she was born, nor in the years that followed when you were fighting to save your empire. The truth hurt, but it was impossible to deny. The last 6 years had been a downward spiral of desperate decisions, questionable ethical compromises, and a blind obsession with recovering what he had lost. "And now?" Arthur asked almost to himself. "What should I do now?" Robert sighed, sitting down. "First, do what you came to do. Save this project, prove your worth, not to Laura, but to yourself. And then, when you've shown her you're someone she can trust again, ask her." The morning of the presentation arrived with a palpable nervousness of decisive moments. The Nexus Innovations conference room was immaculately arranged, with project models occupying the center. City representatives chatted in small groups with potential investors, while community leaders examined the panels displaying the different phases of the revitalization. Arthur was adjusting the final slides when Laura entered, elegant in a navy blue suit that exuded effortless authority. Since the dinner at her family's restaurant, they had interacted only professionally, in meetings always with other people present. "All set?" she asked. Approaching. "Yes," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I made some changes to the energy sustainability part, based on the community committee's suggestions." She nodded, approving. "Great. They need to see that we're listening, not just imposing our vision." Their eyes met briefly, and Arthur wondered if she could see the transformation occurring within him. Not just the professional redeeming himself, but the man finally understanding the true cost of his past arrogance. The presentation began with Laura welcoming everyone, her natural charisma immediately captivating the diverse audience. When it was Arthur's turn, he felt that familiar mental clarity that always accompanied him at crucial moments. For almost an hour, he guided those present through the project's vision, highlighting how every aspect had been carefully planned to benefit the existing community while creating new opportunities. His passion was evident, contagious, reminding those who knew him of the Arthur Vance who had once revolutionized the real estate market with innovative ideas. "We're not just building structures," he concluded, his voice firm with genuine conviction. "We're rebuilding connections between people, between history and future, between economic development and community well-being." The positive buzz that followed was interrupted by the sharp voice of one of the most influential investors present. "Impressive, Vance. You almost make me forget that 3 years ago you publicly declared that community development was glorified charity, and that the only relevant indicator of success was shareholder return." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Arthur felt the weight of all eyes, especially Laura's, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "You are absolutely right," Arthur replied, surprising everyone with his frankness. "I said that, and I was completely wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath. "In recent years, I've learned the hard way that building solely for immediate profit creates empires of sand, impressive on the surface, but without real foundation. This project represents not only a new approach to urban development, but a new philosophy that balances financial prosperity with positive social impact." When his eyes met Laura's again, he saw something he didn't expect. A flicker of pride. Not for herself or for her success, contrasted with his downfall, but for something more fundamental. The validation of a vision she had always championed, now finally understood by someone who had once ridiculed it. The rest of the presentation went smoothly, with technical questions competently answered by the team. By the end, it was clear the project had received unanimous approval to proceed to the next phase. As the guests dispersed for the closing reception, Arthur was approached by an elegant woman who had watched the presentation from the back of the room. "Mr. Vance, I'm Eleanor Jenkins." She introduced herself formally, although they had met briefly at the restaurant. "Mrs. Jenkins, it's a pleasure to see you again," he replied, genuinely surprised by her presence. "I came representing the Neighborhood Business Association," she explained, "and also to see my daughter shine, of course." Her gaze briefly shifted to Laura, who was chatting animatedly with the mayor across the room. "She's extraordinary," Arthur commented sincerely. "Always has been." Eleanor studied Arthur with the same intensity Charles had shown days earlier. "You know about Amelia." It wasn't a question. "Yes," he admitted. "Recently? And what do you intend to do with that information?" The question was direct, non-judgmental, just the practical concern of a protective grandmother. "Nothing, for now," Arthur replied after a moment of reflection. "Except prove that I can be someone worthy of trust. The rest will depend on Laura." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Charles said you had changed. He has a good eye for character. I hope I live up to his assessment." A small smile touched the woman's lips. "Amelia asked about you, you know, after the restaurant. She wanted to know if you were the man from the turtle stories." Arthur frowned, confused. "Turtle stories?" "Ask Laura," Eleanor replied enigmatically, moving away with the grace of someone who had just planted a seed and would now wait patiently to see what would sprout. On his way home, after the undeniable success of the presentation, Arthur felt strangely light and, at the same time, burdened by the weight of possibilities. A daughter. A second chance. A story that was only just beginning to be rewritten. Upon entering his modest apartment, he found his mother awake, watching an old black-and-white movie they both adored. "How was it, son?" Mrs. Evelyn asked, her eyes shining with that unconditional love that had always sustained him. "It was transformative," he replied, sitting beside her. "Mom, I need to ask you something important. Your medical treatments over the past few years, how are we really paying for them?" Her hesitation was answer enough. "You know," she murmured, "I've suspected recently. It's Laura, isn't it? She's been helping anonymously," Mrs. Evelyn confirmed softly. "She approached me 3 years ago, when you started having problems. She said it was a repayment for how I treated her when you two were together." Her eyes filled with tears. "I always liked her, Arthur. I always knew she was special." "She is," he agreed, his throat tight with emotion. "And I was a fool for not seeing it in time." That night, lying in the simple bed that had replaced the imported mattress of his former penthouse, Arthur stared at the ceiling with open eyes. The revelations of the past few weeks had unleashed an avalanche of emotions he could barely process. Somewhere in the city, his daughter, was probably sleeping now, perhaps dreaming of turtles and princesses, a child who carried his eyes, his blood, but who had grown up without knowing him. For the first time in years, Arthur Vance cried. Not for lost riches or a crumbling empire, but for irrecoverable time, for moments he would never live, for first steps and words he had not witnessed. And amidst the tears, a resolution crystallized. Regardless of the project's outcome, regardless of whether Laura would ever forgive him or allow him to properly know Amelia, he would be worthy of the title he never knew he possessed. Father. The grand finale, the second quarter of the project, advanced with an intensity amplified by the success of the first presentation. Investors who had hesitated before now competed for participation. The city council offered additional licensing facilities, and the Lantern District community fully embraced the initiative. What had once seemed like Arthur's last desperate attempt to save his legacy was gradually transforming into a reference model for sustainable urban revitalization. But as the project flourished, the personal tension between Arthur and Laura grew. After discovering about Amelia, he respected Laura's silence on the matter, but every interaction now carried the weight of unasked questions, of postponed conversations. "The environmental impact reports have arrived," Laura announced, entering the project room where Arthur was working late alone. It was the first time in weeks they had met without other team members present. "Any problems?" he asked, noticing the tension in her posture. "Nothing we can't solve." She hesitated briefly. "We'll need to recalculate the distribution of green spaces in the east sector." As they discussed the necessary changes, the atmosphere between them gradually relaxed, replaced by the familiar rhythm of professional collaboration they had developed. It was during this moment of synchronicity that Laura's phone rang. "Yes, calm down, Eleanor. What?" Her expression transformed into pure panic. "I'm coming now. Call the ambulance. Don't wait." Upon hanging up, she was visibly shaken. "Amelia! She fell from the tree in my parents' backyard. Eleanor said she's conscious, but—" "Let's go," Arthur said immediately, grabbing his car keys. "I'll drive." The drive to the hospital was filled with agonizing silence, broken only by the calls Laura made, checking for updates. When they arrived, Amelia was already being examined. "Fractured arm, some scratches, but nothing serious," Eleanor informed them, hugging her daughter. The doctors said she was lucky. The relief that flooded Laura's face was mirrored in Arthur's, though he tried to conceal it. It was at this moment that Eleanor noticed his presence. "You came too," she observed without surprise. "We were working together when you called," Laura quickly explained. "Where is she?" "Exam room. Charles is with her." When they could finally see Amelia, the girl was sitting on the gurney, her small arm in a cast, but her indomitable spirit intact. "Mummy, look! I'm going to get a turtle drawn on my cast. The nurse promised." Laura hugged her daughter carefully, tears of relief silently streaming down her face. "You gave me quite a scare, little one." It was only when she pulled away that Amelia noticed Arthur standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Hello, pumpkin soup man." She greeted him with the innocence of children, making Charles raise his eyebrows, surprised. "Hello, Amelia," Arthur replied, emotion making his voice hoarser. "How are you feeling?" "It hurts a little, but I'm brave." Like the turtle from the stories. That reference again. Arthur cast a questioning glance at Laura, who averted her eyes. After sorting out the hospital discharge details, Charles took Amelia to complete her last examination, leaving Laura and Arthur alone in the waiting room. "Thank you for bringing me," she finally said. "I wasn't fit to drive." "No need to thank me," he hesitated. "Laura, we need to talk about Amelia." Her expression immediately hardened. "Not now." "When then?" "It's been almost 6 months since we started this project. We're halfway through, and we still pretend there isn't an elephant in the room every time we meet." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion evident. "You're right, but not here. Not today." 2 days later, with Amelia recovering at her grandparents' house, Laura invited Arthur for coffee in the park near the project site. The day was exceptionally beautiful, with a deep blue sky contrasting with the first autumnal leaves. "Is Amelia doing well?" he asked, when they sat on a secluded bench. "Already exploring the world with a cast on her arm," Laura replied with a small smile. "Nothing stops her for long." "Like her mother," Arthur observed. A silence settled between them, laden with 7 years of distance and secrets. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he finally asked, his voice gentle, without accusation. Laura took a deep breath. "Do you really need me to answer that? After what you said at that dinner?" The memory of that night hung between them. The charity gala dinner, Arthur's condescending comments about Laura's naive dreams, the public declaration that she didn't fit into his world. "I discovered the pregnancy 3 weeks later," she continued. I tried to call, but you had blocked my number. I sent emails that were never answered. Then, when I finally managed to schedule a meeting with your secretary, I saw in the newspapers that you were engaged to that Swiss banker's daughter. Arthur closed his eyes, shame burning like acid. The strategic engagement that lasted only 4 months. Another attempt to expand his empire through social connections. I decided then that my child deserved better, Laura concluded. Deserved a father who truly wanted them, not one who saw their existence as an inconvenience to his public image. You were right, Arthur admitted. The pain of recognizing this truth was almost physical. At that time, I would have been exactly the kind of father you feared. Laura watched him with surprise at his frank admission. And the turtle stories? He asked, shifting the subject slightly. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Amelia always asked about her father. When she was little, I made up stories about a prince who gave the princess a magic amulet, a perseverance turtle, before leaving for distant lands. The brooch, Arthur murmured, remembering the small gift he had given Laura when they first met. Yes, she met his gaze directly. Ironically, that symbol of perseverance became my talisman as I built Nexus Innovations from scratch. Arthur absorbed this revelation, imagining Laura pregnant and alone, transforming his rejection into fuel for an extraordinary ascent. What happens now? He finally asked. I don't know, she replied with honesty. But any decision will be based on what's best for Amelia. That night, an unexpected storm hit the city. Arthur was woken at 3 a.m. by a frantic call from Robert. The complex is flooding. The river overflowed and water is rushing into the project site. When Arthur arrived at the location, the scene was chaotic. The security team tried to save equipment while muddy water rose rapidly, threatening to invade the warehouse where they stored blueprints, models, and all the original project documentation. To his surprise, Laura was already there, soaked to the bone, coordinating rescue efforts. The sustainable material prototypes are in the South Depot, she shouted over the roar of the storm. If we lose that, we'll be months behind. Working side by side, under the relentless rain, they led a desperate operation to save months of work. It was during this chaos, when they finally managed to close a makeshift sluice gate to divert the water, that it happened. Exhausted, drenched, and covered in mud, they found themselves alone in the temporary site office, the storm still howling outside. Do you know why this project is so important to me? Laura asked suddenly, her voice almost inaudible over the drumming rain on the metal roof. Arthur simply waited, intuiting that something fundamental was about to be revealed. That idea of sustainable urban integration that you ridiculed 7 years ago, the concept that formed the foundation of Nexus Innovations. She met his gaze directly. It was yours, Arthur. Something he had mentioned casually during one of their walks, an idea he had dismissed as interesting, but impractical. You built an empire from an idea I discarded, he concluded. The irony almost poetic. And now you came to me to save your last project with that same idea, refined and expanded, Laura completed, without malice, simply stating the extraordinary circle life had drawn. At that moment, drenched and exhausted, something fundamental shifted between them. It wasn't forgiveness, nor reconciliation. It was something deeper, recognition, of how intertwined they were, of how each had shaped the other's journey, even in the years of separation. What do we do now? Arthur asked for the second time in 2 days. Laura looked at the partial devastation of the project they had fought to save. We rebuild. It's what we always do. The final quarter of the project advanced under the relentless pressure of deadlines and the shadow of the flood damage. Although they had managed to save most of the essential documents and prototypes, the schedule had been severely impacted. The inauguration date, however, remained unchanged, exactly 1 year after the partnership began. In the weeks following the storm, something subtle changed in the dynamic between Arthur and Laura. The shared knowledge, both about Amelia and about the intertwined origins of their professional journeys, created a new ground of mutual understanding. It wasn't exactly reconciliation, but a renewed respect that transcended the purely professional. It was during a tense meeting with new investors, just 6 weeks before the inauguration, that Arthur's true transformation was put to the test. Frankly, this concept of integrated affordable housing compromises the profitability potential, argued Frederick Palmer, a representative of a powerful international investment group. With a few strategic modifications, we could triple the return, transforming the residential sector into luxury condominiums. The Nexus Innovations boardroom fell into tense silence. All eyes turned to Arthur, the man who, in his not-so-distant past, would have been the first to agree with such a proposal. Laura remained silent, her gaze fixed on Arthur, as if this moment were a final test that she would not interfere with. "Mr. Palmer," Arthur began, his voice calm but firm, "I perfectly understand your perspective. In fact, that's exactly how I thought for most of my career." Palmer smiled, satisfied, but Arthur raised a hand to continue. And it was precisely that thinking that built temporary empires and left permanent scars on communities. The value of this project is not just in the immediate financial return, which, I might add, will be solid, even with the current model. It's in the creation of a sustainable legacy, both ecologically and socially. A murmur went through the room. Palmer frowned. "Poetic, Vance, but impractical. Your shareholders don't share that renewed idealism." It was then that Arthur did something no one expected. He opened his briefcase and slid a document across the table. "This is the deed to my beachfront property in Riviera Coast. It has belonged to my family for 3 generations and is currently my only significant valuable asset. I am offering it as additional collateral to ensure the project is executed exactly as planned, without compromising accessibility or community commitment." Laura couldn't hide her shock. The Riviera Coast property was legendary, a historic mansion on one of the last preserved stretches of coastline that Arthur had always sworn never to sell, even in the worst moments of his financial crisis. "This is unnecessary," she finally intervened. "Nexus Innovations can guarantee the project's integrity without—" "It's not just a financial matter," Arthur gently interrupted. "It's a statement of commitment, of values." His eyes met hers with intensity. "Of who I choose to be now." The meeting continued, with Palmer clearly uncomfortable, but unable to refute the unequivocal demonstration of commitment. When everyone had left, only Arthur and Laura remained in the room. "You didn't have to do that," she said, still processing what she had witnessed. "Yes, I did," he replied simply. "Not just for the project, but for myself." He paused significantly. "And for Amelia." The daughter's name hung between them like a promise, a question, a possible future. "Arthur," Laura began hesitantly. "About Amelia, I've been thinking perhaps it's time we talked about how to proceed." Before they could continue that crucial conversation, however, Robert rushed in, his face pale. "We have a problem," he announced. "I just received information that Edward Foster is trying to sabotage the project's final financing." "Edward," Arthur repeated, stunned by the mention of his betraying former partner. "How?" "Apparently, he has contacts at the main bank funding the final phase. And," Robert hesitated, glancing at Laura, "he's using privileged information about Nexus Innovations, information he could only have obtained through—" "My sister," Laura completed, closing her eyes briefly. "They're still together then." Arthur looked at her, confused. "Your sister and Edward started dating shortly after he betrayed me," Laura explained. "I always thought it was a coincidence, but now—" "It wasn't just a coincidence," a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to find Eleanor Jenkins at the door, her normally serene face now marked by determination. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Eleanor entered, closing the door behind her. "I came because it's time for all truths to come to light, including those I kept from you, Laura." Over the next 30 minutes, Eleanor revealed a plot that left everyone stunned. Laura's uncle, Eleanor's brother, and an influential investor had orchestrated a silent campaign against Arthur after the breakup, using his influence to hinder loans and partnerships that could have saved his businesses. "He was furious about how you treated Laura," Eleanor explained, her gaze divided between shame and determination. "And when he learned of the pregnancy, well, he swore you would pay for every one of her tears." "Uncle Robert did this?" Laura questioned, horrified. "And the connection with Edward?" "Edward sought out your uncle on his own, offering information in exchange for contacts and opportunities. When he started dating your sister, access to confidential information only increased. Arthur absorbed it all in silence, the pieces finally clicking into place. How his downfall had been accelerated by invisible forces, how every attempt at recovery seemed inexplicably blocked. "Why are you telling us this now, Mrs. Jenkins?" Robert asked what everyone was thinking. "Because Robert is doing it again," she replied gravely. "This time, attacking the project through Edward. And why?" She looked directly at Arthur. "I believe some debts have already been overpaid." In the days that followed, a coordinated operation between Laura and Arthur neutralized the sabotage attempts. Laura's uncle, confronted by his niece, finally admitted his actions, and although he showed no regret, agreed to cease his personal vendetta. 2 weeks before the official inauguration, Laura invited Arthur to dinner at her home. An unprecedented invitation, signaling another kind of threshold to be crossed. The apartment was exactly as he had imagined. Elegant, but cozy, with vibrant touches of color that had always characterized Laura's personality. On the walls, photographs told the story of the last 7 years. Baby Amelia, Amelia taking her first steps, Amelia at birthdays, always surrounded by family and love. "Is she sleeping?" Arthur asked, as Laura poured red wine into crystal glasses. "Yes, though she resisted bravely, wanting to get to know the man who helps Mummy build the magic park better." Laura smiled, mimicking her daughter's childish tone. Sitting on the balcony, under a starry sky, with the illuminated tea city stretching below, they shared a simple but delicious meal Laura had prepared, including, as a starter, the famous pumpkin soup. "It's truly the best I've ever tasted," Arthur commented, savoring each spoonful. "My grandmother's recipe," Laura explained. "Amelia loves it too." When dessert was served, homemade pudding that involuntarily evoked the memory of little Amelia in the restaurant kitchen, Laura finally addressed the subject hanging between them. "I'd like you to be a part of her life, Arthur." The words, simple and direct, almost made his heart stop. "How exactly?" he asked, careful not to presume anything. "As a father," Laura replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What you always were, biologically. What I now believe you truly can be." "Laura." Emotion made it difficult for him to continue. "I don't know if I deserve that honor." "It's not just about deserving," she explained softly. "It's about what's right for her. Amelia deserves to know the man who contributed to her existence, especially now that this man has finally become someone I can respect again." That night marked the beginning of a new chapter, cautious, delicate, but full of possibilities. In the days that followed, Arthur was formally introduced to Amelia, not just as her mother's work partner, but as someone special who would be more present in their lives. The little girl, with the surprising intuition of children, seemed to accept the news with disconcerting naturalness. "You have eyes like mine," she observed during their first official lunch together. "Yes," Arthur responded, his throat tight. "I noticed that too." "Grandma said it's because you're my daddy," Amelia continued casually, making Laura choke on her juice. "Is it true?" The moment of truth arrived sooner than any of them had planned. Arthur looked at Laura, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, Amelia, I am your father," he confirmed, his voice trembling. "Although I wasn't present before, which I deeply regret." The girl studied him with that peculiar seriousness that sometimes emerged, temporarily eclipsing her playful nature. "Like the prince from the turtle stories, who had to go away to distant lands." "Something like that," Laura interjected gently. "Except now he's back." "Are you staying?" Amelia asked Arthur directly, her eyes, so similar to his, fixed on his face. "If you and your mother allow it," he replied with honesty. "I would very much like to get to know you better, Amelia, to be a part of your life." The girl considered this with the gravity of a small judge. "Do you know how to tell stories? Mummy tells the best stories." "I can learn," Arthur promised, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "If you teach me." Finally, the big day arrived. The inauguration of the first phase of the Lantern District Revitalization Project attracted authorities, the press, investors, and, most importantly, hundreds of local residents. The old industrial complex, once abandoned and dilapidated, now housed a lush central park, cultural spaces, affordable residential units, and commercial areas that were already 90% occupied by local entrepreneurs. On the stage set for the ceremony, Laura opened the event with an eloquent speech about community vision and sustainable development. When it was time to introduce Arthur, her voice took on a more personal tone. "Just over a year ago, when Arthur Vance first entered my office after 7 years, none of us could have predicted where this collaboration would lead us. Today, we celebrate not only the revitalization of a physical space, but the transformation of perspectives, the renewal of values, and the rediscovery of the true meaning of success." Arthur walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, especially from the residents who, throughout the year, had witnessed his genuine commitment to the community. "Thank you, Laura," he began, looking at her with ineffable gratitude before turning to the audience. "When I started my career in real estate development, I believed success was measured in square meters, built and zeros in a bank account. It took me decades and a spectacular fall to understand that true success is measured in lives touched, communities strengthened, and legacies that transcend concrete and steel." As he spoke, his eyes found Amelia in the front row, wearing a special dress for the occasion, and holding Eleanor's hand firmly. Beside her, Mrs. Evelyn smiled with maternal pride, finally recovered after successful heart surgery that Laura had helped fund. "This project," Arthur continued, his voice choked with emotion, "symbolizes not only what we can build physically together, but how we can rebuild our lives, our relationships, and our communities when we prioritize what truly matters." After the speeches and the symbolic ribbon cutting, as the crowd circulated, admiring the newly inaugurated spaces, Arthur felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Amelia, looking at him with her gray-green eyes, sparkling with excitement. "Daddy!" she called for the first time, the word making time freeze around them. "Come see, the festival's starting." As night fell, the district's traditional lantern festival naturally merged with the inauguration celebrations. Hundreds of colorful lanterns illuminated the streets, some floating on the new park's small lake, others hanging from wires between the restored buildings. Walking among illuminated stalls, with Amelia between them holding their hands, Arthur and Laura seemed to embody the very essence of the festival. Renewal, rebirth, the light that returns after periods of darkness. "I still can't believe you donated the Riviera Coast property to the community fund," Laura commented, as they watched Amelia run ahead to admire an exhibit of animal-shaped lanterns. "It was the right thing to do," he replied simply. "Besides, I've found that possessions mean little compared to what truly matters." Their gazes met, illuminated by the soft glow of the colorful lanterns. It wasn't the look of former lovers rekindling a flame, but something new. A recognition of two people who had traversed difficult journeys to reunite in a better, wiser place. "And what truly matters, Arthur Vance?" she asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Family," he replied without hesitation, looking at Amelia, who was running back with a small turtle-shaped lantern. "Purpose, the chance to build something that remains even when we're no longer here." "A second chance," Laura added softly. "The most precious of all," he agreed. When Amelia reached them, proudly holding up her turtle lantern, Arthur knelt to be at his daughter's height. "Look, Daddy, it's like in your stories, Mummy," the girl exclaimed, her face lit up by the pure joy of childhood. "It's perfect," Arthur responded, his voice choked. In that moment, with his daughter between them and the revitalized neighborhood all around, Arthur finally understood what Laura had always known. That ambition and dreams could, indeed, pay bills, but only when aligned with genuine purpose and values. That empires built on arrogance and separation were destined to crumble, while those founded on connection and contribution had roots deep enough to withstand any storm. Together, the three walked towards the central square, where hundreds of lanterns would be released into the sky. No longer strangers connected by a painful past, but a family rebuilt on more solid foundations of respect, understanding, and, perhaps one day, a love transformed by the wisdom that only time and trials can grant. The same community that had witnessed his humiliation years earlier now observed his redemption, celebrated under the starry sky of the Lantern Festival, where ancient traditions symbolized what Arthur finally understood: that second chances are, truly, the greatest privilege life can offer. Would you have the courage to offer a second chance like Laura did, or would you have held on to the past? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for following to the end. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your opinion. Your participation is very important to us. Until next time.